morning and welcome to the studio here at European Utility Week. With me this morning I have Ben Gardner, who is the president of Northeast Group, a consultancy working out of the US. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Claire.
Probably the biggest question that I guess is on our minds at this time of the year is, what is 2019 going to hold? What are the big trends that we need to be looking out for?
Well, there are a lot of trends that we're looking at Northeast Group, Claire. I think there are probably three big ones that really stand out. The first is around IoT, so this broader IoT opportunity, not just looking at traditional smart metering and utility smart infrastructure, but really looking at a bigger IoT and smart cities opportunity in the municipal and city infrastructure space. So that's probably the first one. The second trend that we're looking at is around analytics, specifically utilities and cities really building out their capability with regards to analytics. And then the third trend that we're watching is growth in the managed services market.
So managed services is something that seems to be raising its head quite a lot. Can you perhaps expand on that as a concept?
Sure, so loosely defined managed services is really outsourcing either operations or even asset ownership to a third party. So this could be at the simplest level, a simple software as a service or SaaS arrangement, to a more sophisticated sort of infrastructure as a service, where they're actually giving asset ownership to the third party who is then leasing it back to the utility. And
IoT, I mean, everybody speaks about IoT as a concept, it's the next big thing. But what is it really going to do for the utility sector in particular?
Yeah, I think 10 years ago, if you and I were sitting here, the conversation would be all about smart metering and traditional smart grid infrastructure. But I think especially for vendors at a show like European Utility Week, they're seeing a much bigger opportunity now in the broader smart city IoT space. So probably the most exciting market segment there is around connected street lighting or smart street lighting, and we're seeing very significant growth in that market to the millions of endpoints level. The other segments are still sort of more blue sky off in the future, things like smart parking and even esoteric segments like connected waste bins and things like that. Those are still a few years off, but street lighting is really the big segment that we're seeing scaling now.
It's interesting that you should mention that, because one of the top stories on the Smart Energy news site has been around the development of connected street lighting. I guess it's a very easy way for a utility to manage demand and power usage.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of excitement around the smart street lighting space now. So a lot of interest. Maybe not so much a few years ago, but the last few years have been very busy in that sector.
So obviously with all the trends, there is a consequential challenge. What do you see as being the big challenges that we are perhaps going to face next year?
Yeah, I mean, there's the usual laundry list of challenges from how utilities will continue to integrate a significant amount of intermittent renewable capacity to struggling with the reams of data coming back from IoT sensors to the usual capital constraints and budgetary pressures that they face. But I think, if I had to really boil it down to one big challenge for the new year, it'd be around the courage to step up and actually do these projects. So, as you know, in the utility segment, there's often sort of a inaction or a more conservative culture. But I think just the big challenge is having the courage to do these smart infrastructure deployments if they haven't already, and to realize the very significant benefits that they present.
I guess one of the biggest challenges that utilities face is changing from that security of supply first mindset, security of supply above everything else, to being allowed to explore and take risks in an environment that has traditionally been incredibly risk averse.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
Anything else that has come across your desk just recently that you think, that's an interesting point, hadn't thought about that before?
Sure. Back to your question about trends, I think one of the other big trends that we're seeing is around analytics, and utilities and cities continuing to build out their capability with regard to analytics. I think that when people talk about utility analytics, they often talk about customer engagement analytics or load management analytics, but probably the most exciting opportunity that we're seeing now in analytics is around revenue protection. So Northeast Group recently published a study which found that $96 billion is lost every year due to electricity theft and other non-technical losses.
Okay.
And you can imagine the usual suspects of Latin American utilities and South Asian utilities, including India.
In Africa?
Yeah, sub-Saharan Africa, especially in Nigeria. But even in the US market, I mean, it's a small percentage of non-technical losses, but due to relatively high electricity prices and very high electricity consumption there, it's actually a very significant dollar amount, I think $6 or $7 billion. So, I mean, the problem is widespread, and we think it's a huge untapped opportunity that we'll probably see more of in the years ahead.
I think that'll be a very interesting one to chase and to see how that develops. Ben, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Claire.
From European Utility Week, thanks for watching.